Welcome to the Can't Read Music podcast. Today we're going to be talking about the production process and a little bit of the writing process as well, actually. I'm Dan.
I'm Stuart.
So, where do we start? I guess we start with maybe the writing process, where we, start with absolutely nothing for a track and build it into this, you know, 3 minute or 4 minute thing that's got choruses, lyrics, and different sections and whatnot. Yeah. So my starting point has always kind of been start with one simple thing, one instrument or one rhythmic element or something. Usually it'll be something like, and this I think this was true for the track Virtual Shroud. We start with just a just a repeating, really simple repeating rhythm that I might have just accidentally hit on the keyboard, and then build everything around that. So like, oh well, we now know that it's in the key of A minor or whatever the key is, or that's an A that I'm hitting, but A minor chords might sound really good around it, and then we just sort of, force our way through building a chord sequence around that,
Yeah, a lot of trial and error in the beginning stages, I think.
Yeah, that's right. Some of the things were built off of, influences, as we can talk about. For example, we did have a track that didn't make the album, but it had a very Kavinsky-esque bass line. It was that down, down, down,
Yeah.
down, down, down. Really big, high resonant bass. Yeah, that was pretty cool. And that idea for that whole track came just from the bass and trying to sort of get a feeling and a flavor of what Kavinsky was doing.
Yeah. I think actually
But
one thing, like while we just brushed on the subject,
mm,
you mentioned like one track that we worked on that didn't make it to the album. You want to
yeah,
mention how many tracks we worked on in total before we were happy with the songs we've got for the album now?
yeah, I guess that's part of the writing process as well. Is like
Yeah.
writing as much as humanly possible, because you know that 60% of it or whatever you're not going to actually use.
Yeah.
So I think we did like 32 to 35 tracks
Yep.
in total, and sort of had or did not have a feeling for them. And the ones we had a feeling for, spent a lot more time on, polished, and eventually got to the album. And we'd have some that we just did not have a feeling for. We'd write and write and write, and we'd be starting to feel like, oh, I'm forcing this, and either you or I would just be like, nah, let's move on to something else.
Exactly.
To
And
do something different.
as soon as you're like tired of it, if you're not finding it interesting, why is anyone else going to find that interesting?
Yeah,
Like
yeah, that's right.
you're in the process of creating it and you just can't be bothered. Probably no one's
Yeah,
going to listen to that song.
that's right. And I think there was one exception though, where we had that piano. I think it started off as a piano piece, and we just could not do anything with it. We didn't have any ideas of what to do, and then we just left it for ages, and we're just like, whatever, do loads of other tracks, and then we came back, and we plucked just the piano piece that we liked out of the messing around that we'd done before, the other projects that we'd done before, sat it in a brand new, fresh project, put a brand new sort of synth sound on it before even listening to it, and then just went in a whole different direction. So instead of it being upbeat and, I think, how did it go before? Bow, 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 something like that.
Yeah.
Really happy, sort of upbeat kind of turned into one of our darkest songs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which fits better with the album in general, I'd
It's
say.
much better with the album. We love it more.
Yeah.
And just taking, trying to like force out a track with that piano piece, actually taking a break from it for some time, taking the one bit we liked out of those sets of projects because I think we'd started quite a few projects with that same piece, slapping it in a brand new project, empty project after quite some time, and working in a completely different direction was the savior of that piece of music.
Definitely. It's like when you're doing something, I guess like a wine tasting kind of thing, and they have a palate cleanser in between. If we kept
Yeah, that's
working
right.
on that, we called it Project 7, a very good name
Project 7,
while
yeah,
we were
that's
working on it. And every time we would come to it, we spent so long on it. And that first iteration was always in my head. So whenever we tried anything that was different to what we had originally, it just sounded wrong. Like it wasn't going
Yeah,
how we expected.
yeah,
Taking that break and working on other tracks gave us, I think, at least gave me a chance to forget how we used to have it and
yeah.
let me think about it in a totally different new
New
way.
light.
And
Yeah,
that was, we could probably do that for quite a few of the like bits and pieces we've got lying around. But Project 7 was really the one where we wanted to get it in.
yeah. There was something about that chord sequence that we'd written that we just loved, and we knew we wanted it in the album.
Yeah, how
And I
did
think
you
that's a
come up
really
with that?
interesting. Sorry,
How on earth did you come up with that? I don't
I
remember
don't know.
where it came from.
I don't know.
I think that was one of the ones where I jumped on Zoom and you had that sitting there waiting. Like, I think that was the case. I don't think we built that
Um,
together. I'm not 100% certain.
I think we built it together. I think we
Really?
built it together. Yeah, I can kind of remember. I kind of came up with the chords, just the basic chords, and then you came up with like the embellishment,
Oh,
the sort of
like
top
two,
line
three notes
between
at
the
the
changes and
yeah.
things. Yeah, I think we wrote that together. I can't remember what the idea behind that was and why. I think it was the synth sound that actually got us doing that one. I think we found. I just bought that new. What was it called? Native Instruments Analog Dreams collection of synths, and there was a really nice patch in there for like a very 80s style synthwave, soft, just really nice. But then there's also that sort of brittle kind of lo-fi aspect to it as well, which was really nice. And I think we just found that, and then just started playing some chords in it, and then I just knocked some chord sequence together.
Yeah.
And I've always been trying to do. I can't remember if I said this before to you. Do chord sequences that aren't just like 4 chords repeated over and over and over.
Yeah.
Because so many of the tracks I've built in the past are just, I find like 4 chords and like, great, loop
Yeah.
for 4 minutes, and didn't want that.
Yeah. I mean,
So that's where,
a long time ago, I was trying to be a bass guitarist, and one of the things I found extremely tedious and boring about it
yeah,
was pretty much entirely you play one note 8 times, move to the
yeah,
next note 8 times,
8 times.
do that for 4 different notes, then go back to the start. That's it. You might get a bass solo in the occasional track, but probably not. That's
Right.
it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think avoiding that was the goal, because I don't know. I fell into that pit of just looping stuff, that. So I wanted to escape that, and that's how I ended up with longer. Quite a lot of our tracks have longer chord sequences that differ, and just trying to make it as different as possible. And then the embellishment on top of that came from you, I think, which was quite nice. And then from that, as soon as we got that, we knew we loved it. And that's the difference between that and the 20 something other tracks we've got that just are sitting on the hard drive now.
Yep.
Is that you just, when you know, right? And it was interesting. Some of the other tracks that we cut last minute, we thought we knew, but right at the last minute, we were just banging our heads against the wall, and we're like, it's just not happening.
Trying to stick lyrics in them and things like that, and it's like,
yeah, it
doesn't
felt
go.
like shoehorning, it just like, yeah. So I think we landed in a good place. So writing wise, once we'd got like some kind of rhythmic element or a single synth lead or something that just repeated, usually it would be we'd write the chord sequence after that. So just like we say, a longer chord pattern, maybe with some embellishment and things, and then I think it's usually like, usually it's drag, copy and paste down to another track, stick an arpeggiator on it,
Of course,
on the chords.
Yep.
Yeah, that's right. That was it. And then after we got the arpeggiator, put a filter,
Autofilter cut
on
off.
the autofilter cut off onto the track, and then just sort of automate the filter cut off so that it would open up really nicely. I don't think we've got that many tracks with that in, actually. I think we did it a lot more than we actually committed to the album. Yeah. But that was it. That always made a really nice sound. That was always really nice.
Yeah.
And then it would be like the drums. I think the drums we possibly could have added more difference to, maybe, if being super critical of our own work before we've even released it.
Yeah, let's leave that to other people. I'm sure there'll be some.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really happy with I'm really happy with them as they are.
Yeah,
I think they fit the tracks. I think they I think they work well. They give energy, and that's what you want. And there is some variance to them.
Mm-hmm. They're pretty consistent throughout the album, though. It's a Lindrum sounds all the way through.
Pretty consistent. I've never been amazing at programming drums because I'm not a drummer, right? So I think if a drummer was programming drums, it would just be they do beats and patterns that you just never have thought of. So it's something that I need to improve on. But so consistency was the key, I think, for this. So using the same drum patterns, using the same drum sounds, like you mentioned, the Lindrum that we used for every track, I think, the main drum machine that we used for every track. And I should mention, I don't own a Lindrum machine. They are massively expensive. So we used Logic Pro's Lindrum. It's a reasonable Lindrum emulation, I think. And the other drum machine that we used is a Roland Boutique TR-08, which is a boutique version of the 808, the famous 808. And we used that actually on a lot of tracks. I think we used the kick on some tracks. It's got a nice sort of soft kick that you can have. But the thing that surprised me, actually, that we used it the most for is hi-hats.
Mm-hmm.
We actually used, I think, nearly all of our tracks, we used hi-hats off of the TR-08.
Yeah. Am I correct in thinking you didn't get that synth until after we'd started the album?
Correct. Yeah, correct.
So some of the earlier ones, maybe we went back in and added it.
We went back, exactly right. I did go back in and redo some of the hi-hats and things. Hi-hats in particular. Because I did prefer the kick and the snares on the Lindrum.
Mm-hmm.
So we stuck with that basically throughout the entire album. But like the intro track to the album, at the very beginning, the kick that's there is the TR-08 that was going through. So very small set of drum machines used throughout the entire album. Similar effects, similar levels, similar patterns and everything. And we basically wanted that to be the case for not just the drums, but across the whole range of instruments that we used, to have a very similar feel and sound throughout the whole thing, right? That was important.
Yeah. One way we kind of forced that on ourselves was very early on creating a project, putting the instruments in an empty
Yeah,
project
a
template. Sorry,
project. Yeah.
yeah, and then whenever we started a new track, start with that template. You've got
Yeah.
most of your decisions made for you. It takes a lot of things out of the equation. You don't have to think about it.
That's right.
What drum am I going to use? Well, the drums that are in here.
The drums that are in.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, that was really good. And because also we'd been, one of the things that I started at the beginning was I don't want to use too many presets. I want to like take Serum, which is a synth plugin that you can buy for Logic or other
Ableton,
programs.
no doubt. Yeah.
Yeah, Ableton and whatnot. I wanted to take Serum and actually build with my own hands our own sounds, you know, that might have been influenced by other music, other sounds like Klavinsky or whatever. I guess I keep saying Klavinsky. Why do I do that? Kavinsky. Anyway,
Kavinsky.
but they would never be perfectly the same. Like if you had some dance music producer who just like opened Logic, preset, boom, 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 pack it up, gone, right? You might have another electronic music producer on the other side of the world load up Logic, click the same presets, and people will recognize it, you know. So the idea behind it was take these knobs and turn them in a way that it's unlikely someone else is going to have turned them, right? And create a sound that's unique. And that, so it started off with Serum doing that, and then that's what really led me to like, oh boy, I'd really like to have some physical knobs to turn. so I went out and I bought two boutique synths. I bought the TR-08 synth and the JU-06A, I think it is, which is it's a Juno emulation, famous synth from the 80s, Juno, Roland, and it's basically a emulation of that in a physical device. I think it's actually still under the hood. I think it's actually still like samples and things, but you've at least got knobs and things that you can turn to make sounds that are just different from what anyone else would have turned those knobs to, you know, which is quite nice.
Until it comes the time to perform that song live.
I was just about to say, until you realize you needed to re-record a part that you'd plumbed in the day before, and you've since been tweaking with the knobs. And and then I think we had to build a sound again from scratch one time. I think I remember doing that. So it's not too bad. But I basically started taking photographs on my iPhone of all the settings that we'd built, and then like you can like mark up photos on iPhone.
Yeah.
I started like drawing on the photo, Project 3, lead synth or whatever, so that I knew what the dials were set to.
Yeah.
So that's one of the downsides of doing it with the physical stuff, is that you end up, having to build those things again. But there's kind of also that same beauty to it of, I have to build the thing again. Okay, well, I've got the knobs basically where they were, but it's still, again, it's not exactly the same sound. It's still a slightly different sound, which you would still be happy with. It was close enough, I think, when we rebuilt it. But it was just nice that, for someone to rip us off, they would have to buy this gear, and they'd get us a close approximation, right? They wouldn't be able to just click on a preset and get the exact same waveform,
Yeah.
which is quite nice. But yeah, reprogramming those things, and you'd program in a thing that you liked, and then you'd be like, okay, think of everything we can think of to record with this before we like move on to something else. So we'd be like, okay, well, let's do it, up 3 octaves, down 3 octaves. We'd do it like, we'll do the chord progression, we'll do a lead, we'll do a blah, 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 blah. Everything, every permutation of everything you could do whilst you've got that fixed in.
Yeah. And keep them all in the Logic project as audio files. It just grows and grows in size in case we need it one day.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But that was good fun. I really enjoyed tweaking around with that. one of the things that's interesting that really leads into this sort of working remotely piece that you and I have been doing is I'd be here fiddling with knobs and things on the physical machine, and I'd have to dial in on the iPhone so that I could point the iPhone's camera at the synth and you could see what I was doing, so that it was kind of inclusive.
Yeah, otherwise I'm just sitting here like this for half an hour.
Yeah.
That one bit that we did have to re-record and get the settings the same with no reference. I just remember sitting here while you change the knob, play it, listen to the original. Nope. Change a knob. Play it, listen to the original. Nope. Change like for a really long time. But like that's just to get it as close as possible.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was fun.
It's a shame they don't have some kind of virtual version of the boutique synth that you can load in Logic or something, which would be pretty cool. So that just like represents the knob positions and things, so that you can share your screen. And because that's basically how we did everything. Everything was done with, we get on a Zoom call, we turn on shared audio with surround sound, stereo audio, and I'd share my screen, open Logic, and we'd start writing. And then I think there was a bit of back and forth of I would send a project to you, and then you'd open it in your Logic and do whatever you need to do in it on that side. And so there was a bit of asynchronous stuff as well between us at the early stages of the writing, I think.
Yeah, it didn't work out as well. A lot of, to begin with, you had plugins that I didn't have and things like that. So there's always that, I can't open this project, or if I open it, it's missing the lead sound. Or
that's right. Yeah, I do remember doing a lot of the, I need to prepare the project for Stuart.
Yeah.
So bounce down everything that he doesn't have into a new track, mute everything that, and then when you open it, you'd still have all the dialogues, I assume, of, you don't have this, sucker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Eventually, I think I got to a place where I could open them all without any issues, because I got the same software, the same software,
keyboard,
same hardware, apart from the synths.
And I think the biggest thing is just like I've got all the project files on my machine. We pushed them to Google Drive, but there's that little bit of manual effort of like I've just saved a project after a load of work that we've done, and now I have to like manually zip the file, upload it to Google Drive. You have to find the latest version, download the thing, unzip it, put it onto a location on your. It's not seamless, There needs to be some service. Some service. There's a gap in the market here. There needs to be some service where you can have collaborations on projects. You just on your local machine, you've just saved your project, and ideally it would recognize the timestamp of the last update on the file that's changed and just automatically push the changes, to the server, and then automatically push the changes down to your collaborators, or save the project in Logic, open up the little window for the whatever the tool is, the service is, write a little message of what you've done, what you've added, and just hit commit, and that both commits and pushes,
Yeah.
Yeah.
If only that existed.
I need to build that service. Splice. Splice are the company from whom I bought Serum, that synth. They also used to do that kind of thing. They used to have a service where you could collaborate and push different versions of files and things. I think they actually stopped doing that. I think they actually stopped providing that service. I think I saw an email come through. So anyway, what we ended up doing is a bit of G Drive
or Git
for the bounced, and Git. So we'd use G Drive for the bounce stuff, essentially, the assets that came out. We bounce tracks, share them on there, and Git. I don't know if many people know what Git is. It's sort of a, how can you explain it? Source control system, but it's for coders primarily, people who write software. And when you want to make changes to that software, you might want to track the history of the files you're changing, so you can commit all the changes you make over time, and it keeps a history. And then you push those changes, and other people can pull them and see the latest changes you've made. We thought, because we're both coders, we thought, hey, why not use Git to, keep track of the history of the changes we're making to our music projects. And so the whole album is in a Git repository that we push up. And anytime, well, most of the time, sometimes we forget. I think I did push the final commit for the album. You'd make changes, we'd finish a session, and then it would be, Git commit, and then you'd wait 30 minutes, Git push.
Yeah, Git is not really made for large non-text files that like audio stuff.
No,
it's made for source code, which is text, and only one line might change in a file.
Yeah, I think the main reason to have it for the music piece was really in case something was corrupted. If we opened a project and it was completely knackered, we could because there's no way we'd sit and diff all the logic source code, or the source file. Like, I think it's XML, that describes everything. It's just like, no way we're going to diff our music like that. So it was literally just, okay, well, this commit here was the last good, last known good point of the music. We'll roll back to that, and if we have to rebuild some pieces of it, so be it.
It's kind of also like it served. We've never needed it for this case, but it's an offsite backup. So it's on my machine, correct, it's on your machine, and it's on a third machine. So the chances of all of us having earthquakes, house fires, and floods at the same time is massively reduced.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's a really good point, actually.
We never actually used the stuff that Git is for. Like, we never reverted a change with Git, I don't think, apart from maybe... No. Right at the beginning, I think I worked on some on the same project as you, and we had
some
conflicting changes. There's no... With Git and Logic projects, there's no way to resolve that.
No.
One of you's just got to throw away
I think I just threw everything of yours away.
Yeah, probably. Good call.
It's the same way I do it at work. I don't care what your code changes are. They're gone.
We're using my version.
That's right. So yeah, it was a safety net. We never had to use it, but it was a safety net. It was nice. It's always good to know, because I have had the unfortunate experience of having a hard drive die and lose projects, and it's gut-wrenching.
Yeah.
I spent a few months trying to rebuild that track. That track is Constellation on the album Constellation. Yeah, and I had it on a hard drive. The hard drive died, and I've just lost that whole project now. I'm gutted, absolutely gutted.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started trying to rebuild it for a few months, and I only got so far. I might continue one day, but it's so hard for all the reasons we just explained around, you got to get those knobs in the right position, and, things like at the end of the track, I had what's called like a coda, like an outro, and it was a nice little piece of, you'd had all this sort of chaotic, it was kind of upbeat drums and things like that, and it just sort of dissipates into this beautiful landscape of synths weaving in and out of each other, and that was all done by hand-drawn automation.
Yeah, there's no way you're redoing that the same.
So I was like, oh, how do I redo this? It's so hard. So I just gave up on it. I've still got the rebuild project, but I've never got as far as actually finishing that.
You hear about things like this happening all the time. Like, it's in some cases it was done on purpose. Like the BBC used to record over the tapes of their original content because tapes were expensive, so they would just lose forever the content that they'd produced to make some new content over the top of it, like to save a bit of money on tapes.
I don't know why I just kept that on one hard drive. Like, I'm clued into the tech stuff.
Yeah.
Like I'm just, I think
It's not
that's
exactly
just
a
crazy.
large amount of data either. Like you could
It's
fit it
not.
on a USB stick, on your phone,
Yeah,
on Google
yeah,
Drive,
that's right.
anywhere.
I had multiple hard drives. I could have just put it on a different hard drive as well if I didn't want to upload it for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Back up your
Um,
stuff, people.
back up your stuff. Yeah, absolutely right. Can you imagine if we'd never used Git and it'd always been on my machine and we'd finished the album and my machine just died and we lost the whole album.
Yeah, we
And
just have
it's
the
what is it,
bounced.
a year and 3 months worth of work gone.
We just have the bounced versions, which until very recently we weren't even sure were the final versions of the tracks. So
Yeah, that's right. Crazy. So one of the other things I wanted to talk about was using real sounds in particularly electronic tracks. One of the things I'm really keen on is that sort of human element to an electronic track, because it can be when you're listening to it and you're just chilling, it can be quite jarring, just over and over and over and repeating things. And
robotic.
so I like to, really robotic. And so part of that is humanizing the electronic elements so that they're not on the grid perfectly. And also the other part is adding real human sounds into the tracks. So things like breathing, whispering to give like a creepy sound. I did that in my track Alan Rickman, which is a dubstep track that I made. I mentioned in episode 1, and that had a sound in the sort of underneath all the sort of synths and things, and it turns a dubstep track into a creepy dubstep track.
Perfect.
Which is exactly what I wanted, right? And we did a little bit of that in some of our tracks as well.
I remember above the Metropolis when you showed me the project file for it towards the end.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of like slapping my shoulder noise or hitting the sofa noise. A lot of
That's right.
mouth sounds.
There was, I don't know how many tracks there were above the Metropolis, but it was me on my own at home, so I was a bit cabin feverish. And I knew I wanted to do some, because it was like an Asian inspired, very human kind of track, and I wanted to do human sounding percussion. Nobody was in, and I thought, okay, I can go a bit nuts. Great. So I got like hairbrushes, like my wife's hairbrush, and because I love the sound of a washboard. Who doesn't, right? So on the hairbrush, and what else? Yeah, and then the track was like Dan belly hits, Dan chest hits, Dan punching cushion. But when you put all that together, it works, because I mean it's none of it's perfectly in time, but it's all in time enough to be part of the groove, and there's something you can just sense that it's a human doing that, it's because it's not all out of time together, like you've drawn it on a grid and shifted the whole thing. It sort of waves in and out in velocity and time, and you get slightly different sort of sounds, if I punched it this way and the next one I punched it on the side, or you get different sounds, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it was just it's a really good way of adding human elements into an electronic track that kind of just, I don't know, takes the edge off of the electronic element a bit, And again, another reason it makes, I think, our music a little bit unique is that we add a lot more of that sort of human elements, including the vocals, in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Logic has the option, right? If you let's say you just put kick drum in and a snare in, it gives you this humanize option. I think it
Humanize,
is, and it'll affect the velocity and the timing slightly, right? And but
That's
that,
right.
as
Yeah.
far as I know, that's all it does. Whereas you hitting a cushion 4 times, the cushion
Yeah.
changes shape, it changes position, distance from the microphone.
Yeah.
Each sound is different in more ways than how hard you're hitting it and when
That's right.
exactly you hit it. There
Yeah.
are extra elements that your ear hears those things. Maybe not like front and center, but there's enough
Subtly.
variation
Yeah.
to pick that up.
The whole reason it works is because you can't tell, because it's so subtle, it kind of makes it more human sounding. Like those subtle differences aren't like in your face differences. Like they're not like massively in your face. They're just this. You'd have a hard time sometimes picking out the differences, but without them, it's just a completely different track. I think we had a similar thing with one of the other ways that I like to come up with sounds that no one else can come up with, or no one else would naturally come up with, and we'd accidentally, I don't want to challenge anybody, but another way is, I'd build 2 or 3 synths, and then they'd all be playing the same part, but I'd blend them together, and it just sounds like a single synth playing, but a synth that is unique, and I remember I soloed one piece of it for you on one of the tracks, and you said, I can't even hear that. And then I played the whole thing together, and you said, now that's all I can hear.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's amazing how, you listen to this piece, and there's so much intricacy built in that you don't know is there, and you take it at face value. If you solo something out like that, then it's pointed out to you, and it's all you hear. Like you can't hear anything else.
Yeah.
Like, and it's so clear and obvious.
Yeah. It's like
amazing.
when you're in a loud bar or a busy restaurant or something like that. If you
Yeah.
listen for one person, your brain is good at signal processing, right? You can hear
Yeah.
that one person, even though everyone else is talking around the same frequencies, around the same
Yeah.
volume and the same distance away. Your brain can pick out one person, and then you can ignore that person.
Yeah.
Sometimes depends who exactly you're listening to.
It is, yeah.
But yeah, it's the same with parts of a composition or a track or whatever. Once you know it's there, you can choose to listen to it, I think, a lot more easily.
Yeah, absolutely right. I like that. I think I've always thought that I could be a bit more ballsy with my choice of instruments and things, and like putting things right up front in your face that just like, synths that just smack you in the face. And honestly, I could do that. It might be more commercial, but it's just not my style. I really like the sound of a track that sort of melds together, and there are things that stand out more, that you want to stand out more, like vocals or leads or what have you, but they sort of melt in nicely, and everything's kind of, you might pick up, I pick up a subtle synth that's going on in my right ear that I didn't notice before, and it's gone again. Little subtle bits like that is the way I like to do it. But that's just me. Other people, and I kind of admire that way that like some people can put a track together, and they will have really, like, I think it was when I was mixing one of our tracks, I was listening to some other 80s inspired stuff, The Weeknd. I think I was listening to one of his tracks, and I was like, oh, I wonder how loud his kick and snare are, and oh my word, they are loud. I was like, oh my word.
Yeah.
Is that how loud they're supposed to be? That's crazy.
I think crazy. It's that, and the vocals are the loudest parts of that track, and I think that's probably a trend anyway in music of that genre these days.
I mean, it makes sense, right? What's the most important thing? You want the sort of melody from the vocals and the danceability from the kick and the snare and whatnot. But I'm not brave enough to amp up things that, I guess it's my self-consciousness. I'm not brave enough to stand something out that far, which I should try. And that came down to that was so true in the vocals. I was so worried about turning the vocals up.
I was just going to say the same thing.
The first time, I mean, I've been producing for a long time. The very first time I've ever really released tracks where I'm singing on it. Crazy.
Yeah, it takes guts, right? Because if you put something front and center, especially your own voice, your own voice, not like some synth drum sound, whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's your voice. And if you've made it front and center and somebody doesn't like the song or your voice or the lyrics or whatever, it's extremely personal. You can't just say, oh, it's just a drum sound. I don't care if they don't like the 808 sounds. Like, A, what's wrong with them? And B, I didn't make it, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah. It's my voice.
Yeah.
It's crazy. When doing the vocals, one of the things that I think I learned along the way was doing a lot more practice and a lot more takes and utilizing comping a lot more. So I would do verse 1, take 1. Okay, have a listen. No, I don't like it. Verse 1, delete. Verse 1, take 2. And then listen. Not like. But what I should have been doing, I think, is setting up my cycle region, hitting record, and just going, and then comping in. And we did start to do that toward the end, comping in all the best bits into one single unified take. I know that like Billie Eilish and Phineas do that a lot, so it's like what the pros do. And I think that I'm not a strong vocalist enough to be able to just knock out takes that are perfect. I'm no Keith Urban.
I can see that being like comping and recording and repeating being a useful thing across the entire track as well, like not just one verse, because so much can change. Again, it comes to position from distance from the mic and tone of your voice and strain and all of that kind of stuff. If you just focus on one verse, which is what we did, and I think it was fine. I think it's
we changed. Yeah, we changed sort of quite late in the process. We realized, I think, when we were doing First Light, which is track 2 on the album, we'd recorded the first verse, and we'd been actually trying to find the correct vocal quality for that track, and we'd found it, and we'd done it in the first verse, and then we came to do the second verse like a day or so later, and we're like, oh, it sounds completely different. How do I match that now? So I think what we had to do then is just delete all the vocal takes, and then what I did, I think we looped. We didn't loop. We just we wanted to go straight from verse 1 to verse 2. So what we did is, in Logic, if you set up a cycle region and then command click on it, it does a skip region. So we just skipped everything between verse 1 and 2 so that I could record my vocals in verse 1 and then straight into verse 2 and do the whole thing in one take. And then we just bring the playhead back, record again, playhead back, and then we could do the comping after that. What we could have done, I suppose, is taken verse 1 and 2 way out to the end of the project, and just cycled those two, and then just brought the vocals back or something.
Yeah, I mean, if the verses if the music for the verses is the same, you could also have just recorded the second verse, like loop one verse section, and just
that's true.
Deal
one verse section. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah, so we definitely could get more mature at doing vocals, I think, but we started to get pretty good. Like we do a few rounds, do the comping. It sound pretty decent. We do our, adjustments of all the plosives and things, and then we started to do some more advanced kind of backing vocals and things. I say advanced, me squealing into the microphone,
which you may have seen on Instagram.
Yeah, we've got some posts on Instagram if you want to go and check it out. It's embarrassing.
It's hilarious,
but it's on the album. I'm never. I guess I got no shame. I'm never afraid of just giving that stuff a go, because actually it might sound pretty good. Yeah,
that was definitely a case where when you were recording it, and this happened a few times during the album. I can't think of exact times, but
Yeah.
you recorded something, and I was sitting there, head in my hands, like, why are we like, what is he doing? Like, why are we doing this? And then 5 minutes later, it's in the track and it sounds great, and I'm like,
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah. It's weird.
yeah, I don't know how this
Yeah.
is gonna. I shouldn't. You don't make assumptions about something. Like,
Yeah.
try it, put it in
Try
there,
it. Try
delete
it.
it
Yeah.
if you don't like
Because
it.
that's the worst. The worst that would happen is you've wasted a little bit of time and you've deleted something, and you'll know I'm never going to do that again. Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't even say
That's
it was
right.
a waste of time because it was hilarious as well.
It was
It
hilarious.
made
That's true. That's true.
the whole
Yeah.
process has always been fun and enjoyable, but
Yeah. That's the
moments like
point.
that, we several times just in tears, crying,
Yeah.
especially when recording vocals and anything like that.
Actually, yeah. It was the hardest thing, but some of the fondest memories I have are of recording the vocals and things. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I gotta say, I think we did a reasonable job. Like between us coming up with the lyrics, coming up with the melodies for the vocal together, the vocal performance isn't bad. Like I'm no Keith Urban, I'll keep saying that. But like for someone who isn't Keith Urban to knock something like that out, it's not too bad. And then like together coming up with, okay, well what sort of vocal landscape can we put around this main lead? And I think First Light was the one we've done the most work on in terms of vocal landscape. So there's like a lot more ad-libbing, harmonies in the background, that kind of thing. And or what chord is this, could I sing this chord underneath this thing, and doing some vocal delays and preverb and that kind of thing. And I think we did all right. When you can solo the vocals in a track like we did, we'd finished all the takes and got everything how we wanted it, solo just the vocals, and it sound nice to listen to, and it's yeah, I think that's when you've got it, and it makes all that extra detail worth it, because you can just, like sometimes you can just lay down the lead vocal and you're like, okay, done, move on, just turn that one up. But adding those other pieces around it were really fun, and it sounds amazing. And again, it's one of those things where it's subtle. So like, it's spread around the stereo field and it's lower in the mix. But if you didn't have it, you'd notice it weren't there, and it never detracts from the lead vocal. You can hear the lead clearly in that track in particular. But you've also got these other human voices going on in other places that you sort of notice, and you take, you're like, oh, okay, it's a full sound, and there's human voices across the spectrum, of the stereo. It's nice. I really enjoyed doing that in particular.
Yeah,
that piece.
I think it kind of gives a little bit of an effect, like you're listening to a choir or multiple people singing the same thing together, and that's a nice sound.
That's an interesting, very interesting point, because I remember there's times when you want it to be like a choir, where you're doing you're recording the vocals for those chords that you're going to sit underneath and in the stereo field. And then I remember I was trying to like double vocals, which is a whole different beast, where I don't really want it to sound like a choir. I want it to sound like one human voice, but thicker.
Yeah.
That's really hard. That's so hard to do, because you have to, unless you're going to use some clever software trick on one take, which we didn't really want to do. If we're going to do it right,
Yeah.
Just singing the same thing in the same tone at the same time, it was hard. I think that was the hardest thing about the vocals.
Yeah. I think that's where, again, like multiple takes in quick succession and comping really helps, because you just take 2-3 of those out, and there are a few cases, I think, in First Light where it's just like, oh yeah, this vocal is indistinguishable from the one above it. Like both takes were practically identical.
That's what you've got to do, and I think we realized that later on, is you just got to have those vocal sessions where the whole 7 hours or whatever it's going to be is you set up your mic, you set up for doing vocals, and you just spend the day doing those vocals. You just do nothing else, and you just go for it, go for it, go for it. And then there's the whole process of like, okay, I go away and I listen to the track, listen. I'll come back, a week or so later. I want to redo these vocals.
Yeah, and now you got to do all the verses because...
And then you have to set up another 7-hour session, yeah. And you have to do the whole track. You have to record the whole track again because you want it to be consistently, the consistent quality of the sound. So that was the hardest work, I think. Out of everything we've done production-wise, getting the vocals down was the hardest to do, I think.
Definitely. And that makes me very grateful that my vocals were pretty much either spoken or vocoded.
We did spend rather a lot of time on yours as well, to be fair. Perhaps not as many as the billions of takes I took, to do mine, because I'm not Keith Urban.
The setup was more complicated, I would say.
The setup was more complicated. So, we have a track. It's called Outreach. And we mentioned it earlier, it's the little piano piece, and, we ended up wanting it to be a nice mellow piece that's sort of built toward the end, and we didn't want it to have traditional vocals. It actually, I don't know where the idea came from, that it would be voice messages being left for Brett by his friend Steve. And... if you watched episode 1, you'll know where Steve comes from.
Yeah.
So there'd be a series of voice messages playing over the top of this quite mellow track that builds toward the end. And the idea was that the voice messages would start out relatively friendly and they'd build and become more sort of unfriendly toward the end, right? As the track progressed. So we could have had you maybe set up with your machine with Logic and record your voice into Logic and then treat it with EQs and things to make it sound like it was on a phone.
Yeah.
What we actually did was a lot more complicated.
Yeah.
So, I can't remember how we set that up now. We had you on the phone.
Yes. So we were on a Zoom call. We were on a Zoom call.
Yeah, so we were on a Zoom call, yeah.
I had to mute my computer microphone so that I guess I didn't really have to, but I did anyway, so that the audio was just coming through once.
I had to mute my Zoom because there was a take where I was just laughing and everything that I was doing was being picked up by your phone, which was like coming through to my phone, which was then being recorded.
Yeah. So I would mute my mic, and then we would get on a call, and you set up in the end after you bought your new mic, you had a phone holder that you could mount right next to it, and then my audio would go through an actual phone into a microphone into Logic on Dan's end, not mine.
Yeah, that's right. I had to go out and buy a phone holder for that so that we could do all that.
Yeah. And Dan was the one playing the audio that I was speaking to, so that introduced a good quarter of a second, half a second of latency. So every time Dan would count me in, I'd be a little bit late. But in my head, I was perfectly in time. So every bit of audio that we recorded in the end, we just have to shift back,
It was a deterministic amount of time,
thankfully.
Pretty much. It was my Logic on my machine. And I think in the end, we had no countdown. You just went when you felt like... Because it's talking, you just go with the feeling, with the music. So I would just say, are you ready? Okay, we're not laughing. Okay, we're ready. And then I hit record. Logic would play through Zoom. And we had Logic set to output into Zoom's audio device. So Logic would play into Zoom, which would travel over the internet to you. It would play for you in your earphones. And then you would talk into your phone. Yeah, we were on a phone call at the same time. You talking into the phone would come across to my phone, which I would then have my phone stand set up on the desk and then a microphone pointed at the phone. and then your voice would travel out of my phone with a beautiful phone sound, obviously because it's on a phone, into the microphone, and then that would go into Logic. So massive round trip.
Yeah. 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 But authentic.
But authentic. And honestly, the phone sound you get from a real phone, like, it was great. Like, I could have tried to emulate that. I really could have, but it just doesn't feel the same. And you've got a nice story to tell.
Yeah.
as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Along those lines, and like coming back to the using real sounds, with these being voicemail messages, we wanted a phone hanging up sound to be in there. And I think at the beginning we started trying to just create one.
Yeah, I think we started looking through Logic's, because Logic have a bunch of effects and things that you can use. We did
used
find
that for for the beep,
Yeah.
for the voicemail beep. We did use a
beep,
Logic
that's right.
sound. But for the phone hanging up sound, it occurred to me that I have an old rotary dial phone still in the house.
Beautiful.
So I went and grabbed it. And
Yeah.
again, I dropped it here on this end, and I'm pretty sure you were the one recording the sound.
We did that through the phone as well, did we?
Maybe.
I think so. I think you recorded that through the phone, because we were like, well, it's Steve hanging up the phone on his end.
Yeah.
So on the voice recording, that would sound like phone processed as well.
Yes. Yeah.
So you called me again. We set up the microphone on my end to record my phone. Then then we spent some time you just going clunk, clunk.
Can you drop it harder? Okay.
Yeah, drop it a bit harder. That's right. And this is a little tidbit for anyone listening or watching who wants to listen to our album. If you listen to the sound on Outreach, the sound of the phone being hung up, it actually sounds like someone saying "pick up."
Mm-hmm. Really weird.
Yeah. So now that annoying thing about it saying "pick up" will be in your heads as well.
Yes,
because
we've ruined the song for you. You're welcome.
You're welcome. Every single time we listen to that track, all we can hear when we hear the hang up sound on a phone is "pick up."
Yeah.
I don't know how we managed that. It's amazing.
Yep.
How can the
Great
sound...
coincidence.
Yeah. How can the sound of a rotary telephone hanging up sound like someone whispering "pick up"? How?
It really is, though. I mean, that's exactly what it sounds like.
Yeah. Just crazy. But again, a nice real sound that we used. And
we also recorded background sound for that.
That's true.
That track.
Yes. One of the things we really wanted to achieve is building in our children to the sounds of our kids. Not obvious sounds of their voices, but sort of background for that track in particular. Sort of background. Oh, that sounds like a child. It's a sort of off-putting.
Yeah.
So yeah, you recorded.
You just described our children as off-putting.
Yeah. And that's all I shall say on the matter.
On to the next point.
Yeah. How did you do that? How did you record these sort of background sounds?
I was out in the front yard playing with a frisbee with my son, and I recorded it with on an app on my phone that I wrote, my own sound recorder app. It's in the Play Store now.
Nice. What's it called?
Another sound recorder.
Oh, brilliant. Is that literally what you just said?
I guess, yeah.
I heard you say, I wrote another sound recorder.
Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah. So you used that and just recorded it on your phone.
Yeah, that's it. Just since I knew it was going to be background through on a phone voicemail message in the song. Didn't need high quality audio.
High quality or anything. Yeah, that's right.
And I didn't want to bring my son in and get him to pretend you're having fun or pretend you're doing this in the background. I wanted it to be real. This happened and I just happened to record it.
It sounds really good as well. It sounds natural and it's got that sort of random, chaotic sort of timing to it, and it's got like a good dynamic range. So you've got like oh, is that a child? And then somewhere toward the end, there's a shout, and you're like, yeah, that's a child.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, that's my son shouting "super throw" as he throws the frisbee.
But that's great because you don't know what they're shouting, and it's unnerving to hear a child shouting like that in the
Especially in
background.
the context of the rest of the song,
Yeah,
and the album in general.
it's a pretty dark song. Yeah, I think I squeezed Ava in not with the background noise. Although I think she is in the background noise there as well, just because she'd be in the house and she'd be screaming away or shouting or playing or whatever, and it'd just pick her up. But I used her for a build-up in one of the tracks. I can't remember which one it is now. Oh, it's the last track on the album, Death and Eternal Life. So a lead up into a break or drop into a new section. I got her to play the recorder, and then I reversed it, and then auto filter cut off. So it's nice that it's got little elements like that in it. That's the kind of thing I like.
Yeah, until they start requesting performance rights, or
that she's not getting it. She's not getting it. Yeah. There's no credits for her. She needs to come up with her own album.
We got to cut all of this from the episode then.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think that all adds. When you're producing, that's another thing that I really like, and I think you're the same. Is just interesting sounds in the background, or in an ear. So like the cowbell saga. What track was that?
One of the earlier tracks we were working on.
It's Euphoria, I think.
I can't say for sure. I can hear the cowbell. I can hear how we changed the.
I need to get a cowbell in one of these tracks, and then it came down to, okay, how do I warp this thing so that it kind of is an interesting sound that fits with the track? That's not just like a bonk cowbell, you know.
Yeah,
and it sounds really good, and we left it in, and it's just nice. Another one of those. It's like it's just play, isn't it? You're just playing and seeing what comes out and what's interesting.
If I remember correctly, there was reverb on it, then reversed it, and then added reverb to that, but just and then we changed the timing of those. Yeah, the reverb.
That's right, so that it kind of fades in. And then it's got like bounce to it, that kind of like a whoosh, but with a cowbell.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why not?
Why not? And I think there was also because obviously it's got a bit of attack when you hit the cowbell. I think we used that as almost like a rhythmic element to it as well. So works well.
Yeah.
The other thing that we've not mentioned really is organization of all this production. There's a lot of stuff to work on. We had, as we say, we had like over 30 tracks on the go, because at the time, obviously, we didn't know which ones were going to work out, which ones weren't. And of the ones we were going to work out, which ones were going to be on the album. So we had a lot of work going on, and every track at a different stage with things we wanted to remember, things we had to do, checklist items, and so we ended up using Trello, and we'd used it in our jobs before, and it's a really good way of organizing projects, whatever the project is. Do we have to mention we're not paid by Trello?
My wife does work at Atlassian's, who owns Trello.
We're not being paid by them. We're not being paid by like G Drive or Google or anything like that.
Yeah, we're not sponsored yet, but
yet. But if you are interested, can'treadmusic.com. But these are just the tools we happen to just have used in the past and found fit quite well with the production process. And Trello was good because we could be like, okay, well these things are these things are, we haven't even started. Like we've got an idea of we need a track like this, and we haven't even started it. These ones are the ones that we're currently actively writing, and each card, and the idea is that you have multiple lists and you move cards between the lists, right? So one list would be ideas, another one would be, actively we are writing this thing. It'd move into like, oh, it needs mixing, it needs, listening to and mastering and listening to and, what have you. And the great thing is on each card you can have like checklists and comments and things like that, which is really nice because we could be like, oh, we really need to still re-record the vocals, and I noticed this thing about this synth I'd like to change. It's got like a weird artifact or something that we want to get rid of, and you could just make checklists as you're listening to them. It's got a mobile app, so if I was on the couch listening to the album, I could like make notes on there. It was really cool.
Yeah,
one thing I
extremely
didn't
useful
think is,
tool.
yeah, we could have, I suppose, once a card had reached the listening column, we could have uploaded the bounced audio to the card. I think.
True.
I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, I don't know
Instead
if
of-
there's like size limits on attachments on,
Possibly.
but
Yeah. That's something we could look at.
hmm
But yeah, Trello was pretty useful for that, I think. It was,
definitely.
kept us organized, and we didn't forget things, that we had to change.
I think it's the exact right amount of project management tool. Like there are much more complicated tools like Jira or Shortcut or other things that massive overkill for a 2-person project.
Yeah,
And
100%.
we could also have just done it by message, but things would have slipped through the cracks for sure.
Yeah, I found it hard. Just when we were doing things like, I'd if I was doing some tweaking to some synths or something, I'd send you a clip, and then you'd be like, oh, it needs X. You'd send it. You'd send the feedback. I'd send another clip. I'd find it really hard to just keep track of what I've sent you. Yeah, that was difficult. So I think that's where, when we discovered Google Drive's versions was really good, because I could just say to you, go to the folder, the masters folder, and grab the latest MP3. Just grab the MP3 that's there, because you can upload a new version for that one file, and it's just there.
Yeah, there's not like intro version 1, intro version 2 dot real dot.
That's right.
This one's.
We did start off like that.
Yeah.
We did start off with, and the version schema that I'd always gone with music was like the date and then a version. It's just like an incrementing version. So it'd be like 2022 0301.1.2.3 for that same day.
Yeah.
But even that becomes really unwieldy. When you've bounced 15 of these things and you've got now 15 differently named and versioned tracks in your iTunes
Yeah.
or in Google Drive, it becomes so hard.
Yeah. And I would never have wanted to throw any version of any of them away. Like I would keep them all forever. That's just how I am. I keep blurry photos. Like we would just have we would just have at this point thousands of audio files that just useless. You don't really need them.
Yeah. One other thing that I found really difficult about the production process actually was, and we can talk about this in a future episode, when we talk about mixing, is mixing as you're writing. So I spent a lot of time, we would be on a writing session and I would not be able to help myself, but actually just sort of mix things in as I'm going. And stopping, like not doing that as you're writing, probably a more professional way to do it is just like write and get your ideas down. But then we'd like to bounce it and listen to it. And I always I can't listen to something that's like just a collection of ideas at the same volume.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there would be quite a bit of the mixing going on at the same time as the writing.
Yeah. I think we'll have an entire episode about mixing and mastering.
We will. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So that's something to look forward to in the near future. But for this episode, that's it. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions for future episodes, the contact details are at can'treadmusic.com. I've been Stu.
I've been Dan.
Bye.
Bye.